Landry.
Present.
Director Tebow. Kathy. Director McLaren.
Here.
And Director Atkinson.
Here.
Craig Horton.
Here.
And Phyllis Stanin. Here.
Okay. Everybody's here. Sorry you couldn't join us, Phyllis.
I'm very sorry about that too.
I know.
Blank West.
You can't control the planes.
Yeah, I learned that this morning.
Adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Public comment.
Yes, thank you. John Joyce from the Roseman News. At 6 o'clock tonight, the Roseman Community Services District will be holding a public testimony for Olaf Landsgaard, one of their directors who passed away suddenly. He was a director. He also was the first attorney. No. When he got out of law school, they gave him the job to be attorney for the district. And then when his practice grew, he didn't serve as attorney again. But that's going to be at 6 o'clock tonight on 35th Street.
Thank you. Any other comments? No special presentations, consent agenda? Bills?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Agent summary. Is that you, Matt? Or is that all part of that?
It's all part of the consent calendar.
Okay.
That covers items 6A, B, and C.
Advisory committee. I don't see Dennis, but I see Stan.
Stan Powell, City of LA. I think I can say no on Mrs. Dennis more than not. So you have the advisory committee memo in your packet, and as usual, it speaks for itself, but if there are questions, be happy to answer them.
No questions for Stan?
No.
Thank you. Action item, well applications. That's you, Phyllis, I think.
It is. Good morning. We have 3 new production applications recommending for approval on page 35, Exhibit A of your board pack. Including, and I just wanted to make a quick comment. We have a spelling error on one of the applicants. The last one there, and so we're going to make the spelling correction to Exhibit A. These are relatively straightforward. The first one is a new single-family home to be constructed. The second one is a small office area with minimal landscaping to be constructed. And the third one involves 3 parcels that will drill 1 well to share. And they, again, that's for single-family domestic use only. All 3 of the applicants understand that they need to install a meter on their well, and they've all agreed to pay a replacement water assessment. So if there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer those. Otherwise, we recommend approval.
Yes, Phyllis, this is Dwayne Chisholm. I noticed there was some recommendations from the advisory committee with regards to some names and other things. Were those things taken care of?
Yes, I'll quickly go through them, Dwayne. Thank you for mentioning that. The advisory committee wanted to make sure that we had a signed application for the first one, and we do have that now. They also asked whether or not well-being within the service area of Quartz Hill Water District impacts the application, and in this particular case, no, because they simply are not anywhere close to the existing infrastructure. So it was going to be prohibitively expensive for that parcel to try to connect to Quartz Hill Water District. So as a result of that, we felt like that production made sense, especially recognizing that they'll pay a replacement water assessment. And then the final question was whether or not the parties to the shared well agreement should sign the new production application, and the answer is that those parcels have not yet been sold, so we don't know who the other two parties are, but it's clear to us that the applicant for the one parcel has committed to having a shared well agreement and providing that back to us. So we felt like that would cover that process. And then if we feel like that we need the other two applicants to also submit a new production application, I think that we could potentially ask them to do that. But my sense is that at this point, we feel like we have everything covered.
Thank you. I'll move approval of resolution R19-19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Proposed 2018 annual report.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much for your comments. And I'm looking on my screen at the first slide. Perhaps we could click forward on the PowerPoint to, I have just a few slides that would be helpful. Let's go one more. We've already dealt with that. Thanks. Okay, so we have kept the same format for this year's annual report that we had last year, which have the four primary sections in the text, and then the details and accounting in the appendices. And then on this next slide, I have summarized the new items that we have added to this report. Every year we would like to sort of up our game. So the first year, you know, we had trouble just getting everything together at the last minute and getting it out. And then last year we tried to expand some sections of the report and make it more readable and more accessible. And this year we've added some additional products. We've added hydrographs for the first time as we begin to improve our monitoring of safe yield components, and we begin to improve our understanding of the groundwater basin collectively and how it's represented in this annual report. We thought that that would be a good addition to this report. You can use that by just simply looking at it. We have the last 23 years data posted on those hydrographs, and you can get a better sense of what the trends are for water levels over that 20-year period. In the future, we will begin to look at where water levels were the highest over certain periods of time and where they were the lowest, and in particular, begin to better understand water levels from the upper and the lower aquifer. But at least for this report, we felt like that we have sort of moved the ball forward a little bit with the hydrographs. We've also included tables 9 and 10, which summarize the production reporting and identify the number of parties that have not reported. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in the engineer's update later in this meeting. So I'll just keep moving on. That we have a new table 11 added. This was in response to some of the questions that we had last year on the report. 11 and 12 talking about the use of imported water and the drought program participants. And then in Appendix C, we've added another level of understanding with respect to the water stored in the basin to the extent of what we know right now. And so that just, again, provides more information and detail on water banking in the basin for all parties to see. And in Appendix F2, we added an additional page to call out transfers that are really a temporary or a one-time transfer. The judgment requires that we provide a list of transfers in the annual report, and the only reason for pulling out some of the temporary and one-time transfers into F2 is that they impact the accounting. And so we wanted to sort of we wanted to have a table to refer to in the text when we talked about those types of things. So those are just a quick summary of the new items. We did receive comments, and they are listed here. Stan Powell provided excellent comments to clarify text and edits. There was one question that he had regarding a replacement water assessment for Phelan, and we have modified the text to simply note that the Phelan issue is currently under appeal, but that the replacement water assessment amount that had been approved for 2018 would apply. And we can further modification of the text there as needed. We received additional comments, mainly helping us to correct production that had been provided on production reporting, make sure that everything was going consistently for that. Received a request from AVEK to go back for the 3 years that we have in the other water accounting tables and modify the use of production right to the use of stored water. And we're still working with AVEK on some of the details of that to make sure that everything balances out. And then an additional carryover water correction received from SF Land Holding. So those are the comments that we've received to date on the 2018 annual report. There have been a few additional corrections and edits that we've made, and these are sort of just things that the text didn't match tables, and we had some errors with respect to precipitation. And so these are really just straightforward corrections that we've made to the annual report. We do have the obligation from the judgment to include the financial audit. So we're still waiting on that, and as soon as we can get that, we need to get that into the annual report as well. Just a few quick items. Here are the new hydrographs that we talked about. They were statistically selected, so we weren't trying to pick on specific wells. We were looking for long records, and we were looking for sort of representative trends around the entire area, including all of the sub-areas. So that is a new figure into the report, and we'll expand on that from a hydrogeologic perspective going forward. And then on the next slide, we've just summarized the well application process to date, so that I know that the board has asked in the past, how many small pumpers do we have total? How many of this do we have? How many of that do we have? And where has this all occurred? So this is a summary map that we will continue to keep updated so that we can keep up with new wells going into the basin as well as new production. On the next slide, I've just shown the general map that you've seen in previous reports with the indication by color ramp of water level changes. So you can just see in areas of blue where water levels have risen. This is just from March to March. So this is March 2019 compared back to March 2018. So this is just the 1 year change. You can see areas where water levels have gone up in that year, and then other areas where water levels have declined. The largest decline, of course, associated with the water bank, and it's not exactly a decline. If you look at the brown and yellow areas around the AVEK Westside Waterbank in the West Antelope subarea, it will look as if water levels are really declining there. What has happened is that last year there was a large influx of water into the banking, about 70,000 acre feet or so, which created a mound. And so last year we saw a large water level rise. And so now over time that mound has dissipated and the water is still in the basin, but we just simply don't have that mound, as you can see around that area. So that is a little misleading, but it shows a localized water storage decline, but then because that water has moved out into other areas in the West Antelope subarea, that has resulted in a water level rise there. So these are the types of things that we're required to do to get to a storage change, and I've summarized the storage change on this next slide. And we do it by sub-area because we think that might be most helpful for parties to review. The largest storage change that we had between March 2018 and March 2019 was actually in the southeast sub-area. Storage change there of about 73,000, a decline of 73,000 acre-feet of groundwater and storage there. But you can see overall with the localized rise in water levels and the localized declines in water levels, that overall the basin pretty much evens out, and the change in storage from 2018 to 2019 is relatively small, only about 1,300 acre feet or so in that area. Okay, so the schedule going forward, which is really, really important to pay attention to for us. July 8th, we'll post a revised draft that will have all of the additional corrections and edits that we've listed in those previous slides. We really ask that we have comments back from everyone by July 19th. That will give us an opportunity to quickly get everything revised for the public hearing. The public hearing, if you decide that we're ready to move forward with that, and by the way, we really need to, because the report is due to the court August 1. The public hearing would be at your next board meeting, July 26th, where we will review the report again, take any additional public comments that there might be, summarize the comments that have been made in the most revised draft, and then obtain your approval to submit it to the court. The final, assuming we get reasonable comments that can be incorporated quickly, the final will be posted on July 29th, and then we will ask assistance from the Watermaster Council getting the final report to the court by August 1st. At that point, we also upload the final report to the Department of Water Resources on their web portal in compliance with the SGMA program. So that's it for the annual report. I'll be glad to take any questions or comments anybody might have at this time, and assume that we will notice public for the next board meeting in July.
Any comments? Seeing none? Oh, sorry.
John, you said what this Farms Mutual Water Company, excuse my voice. Phyllis, I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
2017 open era, how much groundwater did they pump?
I don't have that in front of me, John. Patty, staff, do you have your production reporting in front of you? That was a change that was just recently made.
But I can give you that after the meeting, John. I can check with you.
Okay, did they pump any groundwater?
I'm trying to think.
What entity were you talking about?
Copadera, John.
Copadera, okay.
Because I know we're working on a transfer with them, so.
It probably.
Yeah, I'd like to know when's the last time they pumped any groundwater, and how much carryover water that they're asking for. Secondly, on the West Valley AVEK Bank, how much of that water that was, say, 70,000 acre feet were put into the ground over there?
Last year,
How much of that water was moved to Cal City, Rosemont, Mojave, Edwards Air Force Base, and Rosemont Community Service District?
I'm sorry, what was the question about those parties?
Out of that 70,000, how much water was moved into Mojave Water District, California City, federal government, and Boron?
Yeah, so I don't have the specific parties listed, but on Appendix C2 within the annual report, we have tabulated, to the extent that we have the information, the amount of water in storage for use inside of the adjudicated area and the amount recovered for use outside of the adjudicated area. So you can see, you know, on that table, for example, There was approximately 14,695 acre feet recovered in 2018. 7,000, I'm sorry, the amount recovered is 7,941 acre feet. Most of that was for use inside the adjudicated area, 674 acre feet for use outside of the adjudicated area.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Also, I think on the table for production reports, it should have what COVID or.
I think there was just a change to that, Patty, or we had made a correction to that, so that may not be exactly right now.
Matt, we need to have a vote on this.
Yeah, for item number 8BB, we need to have a motion and a vote to set the public hearing date for July 26th.
July which?
26th.
26th?
I'll move to set the public hearing for July 26th.
That's a Friday.
It's not the next board meeting.
Yeah, it's the 24th, isn't it?
24th, I'm sorry.
I stand corrected.
24th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to have the public hearing on the final approval of the 2018 annual report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Watermaster Authority to lien property.
Yes, this is coming back on the agenda. The memorandum on the topic is on pages 96 to 98. You saw it last month. The advisory, we held off, you held off voting on approving or adopting the memorandum into a resolution pending further input from the advisory committee or from anyone else. In the last month, it's gone to the advisory committee and they indicated they had no comment on it. It's what we discussed last month in terms of an approach to collecting delinquent assessments and recommending the process for doing that. We talked to LA County Council about the difficulties in going through the lien assessment, like a tax lien on property, the expense and the complication of that. It'd be much simpler, cost-effective to do a motion to the court, which is what we recommended. And so the memo is back from May 16th. It awaits any further comment. If not, there's a resolution adopting the memorandum for incorporation of it into the rules and regulations.
Okay, I'll recommend approval of resolution R19-1.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The next matter is going to be deferred pending further comment. The advisory committee suggested we give more opportunity for a more robust discussion. This came up because I was under the understanding that next month there may be a matter involving a transaction between LA County Water Works and AVEK. And with the potential issues that could raise, was there a way of dealing with that when we're required to have unanimous vote of all the members? Is there a potential conflict of interest issue that we should discuss? I want to hear from everybody on this. This was just to get the discussion going, so we didn't come into July. I'm not even sure that it's pending for July at this point, so this may be very premature. But we're soliciting comments from the public, from the attorney group, and anything specific the advisory committee wants to offer on the subject. So it's a deferred matter, not for action today.
Stan?
So this did come before the advisory committee. I'm not speaking for the advisory committee now, but I think parts of this were discussed at the meeting, and I thought it might be helpful to at least provide this discussion to you. The way I looked at this proposal is the unanimous requirement is pretty much the same as saying each one of you has a veto vote on any action. So if something's not acceptable to one person, they can veto it. my initial thought in discussing at the advisory committee, we didn't actually have the matter in front of us, but it looked to me like you had two folks conflicted who were going to vote for this thing. And so if we had a vote of the remaining three, they would all still have their veto, that would be fine. There was a comment at the advisory committee meeting that frankly I didn't digest until after the meeting. But I think the essence of the comment was that works fine as long as whoever's conflicted wants to approve the project. If the person who's conflicted wants to veto it, they've lost the veto. So that's a wrinkle in there, a technical wrinkle. In talking to some other attorneys, one suggestion that I heard, this does look like a matter that probably needs to happen. AVEK and Waterworks 40 are trying to do a transaction. Making this judgment work requires those transactions. One thought I have is not a recommendation that maybe should be discussed. The resolution we had was a very general resolution, set out a general principle of what we do. I think it might be easier to evaluate this if we had the particular action we're looking at now, so everyone knows what's at stake. Then we could do a resolution, not general, not to cover all possibilities, but cover this transaction, with having the two conflicted board members drop out and unanimous vote of the others on this particular item work. That would get out of trying to create a resolution and a rule that would work for all situations. So just for your own thinking on that subject. Thank you.
I'm glad we're having this discussion now, and I think we'll need to talk through this some more, but I've got some basic disagreements with sort of the underpinnings of the comments about conflicts, and that I wanted to share with you maybe. You know, you look like an elected board, and you've adopted some rules of an elected board, such as the Brown Act rules, but you're really not, and in some ways you're sort of the opposite of an elected board. Elected board members have certain conflict of interest rules, which I think Stan was alluding to, that make sure that you're not financially interested in the outcome of decisions that you're making, or that you're not financially interested in contracts that are entered into by the body that you serve on. And there's a whole kind of IRS code of rules interpreting what those words mean, and it can get very complicated. You guys aren't that form of body, though, because you were created by agreement. All the parties to the agreement, the ultimate parties to the agreement, were all financially interested in the outcome. That's why they're part of the lawsuit. So in a way, you're sort of the opposite. The people on this board, in fact, are all interested in directly, particularly the landowner members, in the decisions, every decision of the board. Whether it's an agreement between two parties, or setting the water, the rates that you pay for replenishment fees, or making decisions even on, you know, who can join the lawsuit, or whatever other decisions you may be asked to make. So you got to tread very carefully here if you're going to apply a conflict standard. I think we really have to understand exactly what that means, and it might be different for every one of the seats up here. For example, the public water supplier's seat was chosen by agreement of the public water suppliers, and we have a certain understanding about what that chair's responsibility is to the rest of our group in terms of promoting our interests. But it's completely different, I assume, than the person who's up here represented by AVEK, representing AVEK, who's promoting AVEK's interests. That's why you're there. You know, same with the county. You're there to promote the county's interests. That's why you insisted on the seat. And the landowners have their own kind of representative interest in that you're kind of supporting, you're representing a huge class of people, and obviously that kind of has a different connotation in terms of what you can do to allow your personal interest and how that weighs against the interest of your group. I don't know what that is. That's really by agreement of those groups, how that works out. So I just want to say, tread carefully here before we adopt any rules. We don't want to just blanket assume that the FPPC conflict of interest rules apply. I think that could create a lot of, frankly, if the FPPC rules apply, then you guys, some of you guys would be conflicted literally on every vote. So keep that in mind.
Hi, Warren Mullen with
County Counsel for District 40. I concur with Mr. Lemieux's comments, and I just want to add a few more thoughts. Keith is correct. This is not a public agency. It's not a governmental body, which would be subject to a fairly robust area of the law that talks about conflicts of interest and how those things are dealt with. Rather, the Watermaster Board is an arm of the court, and while the judgment was reached pursuant to a settlement, it is a judgment, and it was approved by Judge Komar, and the judgment, by design, does not have conflict of interest rules as would apply to a public agency. And I think the idea is that everyone's on there because they have an interest in the case, and we're representing the different major blocks of interest that were involved in litigation. This is something that I recall discussing during the settlement process, and I think Judge Komar had that in mind. And because it's a unanimous vote, if there were a situation where one party had some sort of a conflict, or it seemed as if their interests were involved and that resulted in a veto, then the matter would go before Judge Komar. And I think that's how it would get worked out. So if someone thought there was some sort of conflict. The last thing that I'll add is that the judgment contains provisions regarding your duties as members of the Watermaster, and those duties are to the court and to the judgment, and not to your own interests or the interests of the party that you work for. In fact, if any member of the Watermaster Board acts in a manner that the court believes is biased and not advancing primarily the interests of the judgment, then that would constitute a ground for the court removing that person or that body from the Watermaster Board. So the way that I look at this concept, and I think it's important, and like Keith said, I'm glad we're talking about it. I think it was considered by the court, and I think there's a mechanism in the judgment that prevents something from happening, that, you know, the bad types of things that could result from a conflict. So my feeling is it's good as is, and the judgment works in this fashion. I think it has been working. So I don't think we need to change that aspect of the judgment. Do any of you have questions about that, or for me or Stan or Keith?
Warren, so did Mr. Flannery, did he need to recuse himself?
Adam, will you lift it up a little bit?
Is it good? Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Director Flannery recused himself when we voted on the transfer of water to Palm Ranch. Did he need to do that, or should he not? I mean, he could have said he could not. Maybe he could have stayed. And
Technically, under the judgment, I don't think he was required. I don't think you were required to recuse yourself. But I understand why you did. The judgment doesn't preclude you from doing that. You had an alternate who I think sat in your chair, so we had a quorum and were able to vote on it. And so I don't think you had to do it, but I think it is allowable under the judgment. And frankly, my own personal opinion is that I thought it was an ethical thing to do. I thought you were going above and beyond what is required. And I think it said something about your integrity as a board member. And, you know, showed sensitivity to the issue and sensitivity to the mission of the Watermaster Board. But to answer the question, technically, I don't think it was required. Thank you.
I'm glad you did, John.
Well, it involved my son. Yeah, I thought it was necessary.
well, and I was only trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Did you have to or not?
Right, understood.
But Greg, this is a tough one.
Yeah, and I think we did absolutely the right thing Director Flannery did, and if there's the individual landowner representatives have a matter that directly impacts their personal property interests, I'm going to recommend, that's why we have alternates available in that situation. situation. Maybe different for LA County and AVEK, but for the individual property owners, I think that's absolutely the way to deal with it, because then you can deal with the perceived conflict of interest, which I can't solve it by bringing an alternate in for you.
Right. No, I understood, understood. And I think the comments that are made are very well taken, because again, if we have a unanimous vote, let's say, you know, the 2 wells that LA County Water District 40 is applying for to drill, let's say I say, well, you know, yes, I approve. I mean, obviously, if there is an impact to nearby wells, there are 4 other directors here that would say no. So I couldn't really get away with it anyway. And aside from the fact I would not do that, I do understand that we are an arm of the court. I do understand the duty that was given to us, and I do understand the possibility of removing me or whomever of the court as a judge. So the way I see my job in here is really to advance the judgment.
Yes.
And not, yes, I'm here on behalf of LA County Water District 40, but I would even, I'm not advancing purely the interest of LA County within the context of the judgment.
Yes. I think it's like a trustee relationship or in a mutual water company where board members have a duty to act in the best interest of the company rather than the individual shareholders.
Exactly.
So I think Warren's comment was dead on. That your duty is a duty to the judgment and to the basin's health. It's not to your individual interests.
Correct.
So we'll take into consideration these comments and discuss it next month.
So does the 1090 apply to you?
What?
1090? Conflict where you got the vote, you can vote anyway, even though you might have some benefit?
I don't think that that's going to be applicable in this situation. I want to look at it again. The issue, the remedy is, as Warren pointed out, is likely taking it to Judge Comar if somebody perceives that the vote is built-in veto power. So regardless of whether Director Riki and others in AVEK vote to approve the project, there's absolute veto authority in the other 3 members. That's important to remember. So that's all I had on that.
So we're going to bring resolution 1921 back.
We'll bring it back next month.
E. Yeah? Is that you?
Actually,
Oh, be me.
sorry. So I'm going to tee this up for discussion and direction moving forward. Time flies when you're having fun. And we're almost at the end of our 2 years with Todd Groundwater and their contract to provide engineering services. It runs out 31st of December this year. So seeing that, staff and the ad hoc committee met on June 17th to discuss the retention of Todd Groundwater services through 2021. And then really frame up the scope of work and priorities that we want to have within that. And then also the communication structure to support that scope of work and priorities. Out of that, I'm sure everyone's here who was in that meeting. They can correct me if I misstate, but the priorities that came out of that were, first and foremost, within this year, we want to prioritize finishing the rules and regulations. Then moving forward into 2020 and 2021, we want to focus on definitely the base of having all of our annual reporting done to maintain compliance. And then a strong emphasis on meter compliance to support all the production reporting. And then moving into that, our third priority that we want is to develop that groundwater model in order to support Todd Groundwater's work in handling the material injury analysis. So, and then for the communication structure, ad hoc committee recommended reiterating that the focus should be the board directing the general manager, and then the general manager will give direction to the engineer and admin staff to execute those priorities that are developed within the scope of work. The current schedule that we're looking at is to have that scope of services and fees to the advisory committee prior to the August meeting, with the final draft to the board before the September meeting. And then along with this, we will develop the admin staff services scope and fees to be done in conjunction with the engineering service fees. So that, I'm teeing that up, and then I'll let Director Atkinson and Director Reiki fill in the gaps, anything that I missed.
Good. I thought that covered it pretty well. What you have?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Are there any comments from the other board members?
The GM pick the board, or you two?
Yeah, I think the discussion was here that Matt is going to be, in addition to his responsibility with AVEK, he would be the general manager for the Watermaster. And then Peter may be the backup in case one.
How smooth can it go?
Yeah.
Any comments or questions? I'm just trying to get a little more structure so we can, when people call in, they know where to call, and we can try to keep our expenses at a minimum. Moving on. Meter compliance.
I'll take this one. Good morning. As you know, after the last Watermaster board meeting, we sent out certified letters to those producers that have not complied with the meter compliance. So far, it's gotten the attention of several, so there's been a flurry of activity since those letters were received by the producers. So staff is continuing to work on that. We also provided in the board packet on page 104 an update on meter compliance that shows the categories of the various producers, the total number of possible wells as we know it, how many have submitted documentation, and the percentage based on the total known wells. So that's all we have to report. We'll hopefully see at the next meeting once we got their attention with the letter, and hopefully we'll see that percentage increase and total number of compliance increase as well.
I'll just note I got a number of phone calls this month from people concerned about their situation and letters, so I'll forward it to the staff. We've got a very good handle, I think, on who's complying and who isn't. We definitely got the attention of a lot of people for a good reason.
These calls are from attorneys or from private parties?
Private parties. Usually explaining why they haven't complied so far, that they're on their way to doing so.
Any other questions? Phyllis, rules and regs?
Yeah, just one quick slide, which is shown there to you now. I just recognizing that that is our priority as soon as the annual report is out. That's our priority for remaining work this year. And so this is sort of a little bit of an outline that we're providing. And if people have additional topics that they want addressed in there, then they're welcome to provide comments. But as we put together our scope of services and fee, this is the type of document that we're anticipating. And again, a lot of, or not a lot, but much of the remaining level of effort, we already have help from the public water suppliers who provided us with their own draft of rules and regulations. So we're considering that as we put together the remaining parts of the document, as well as comments that we've received from others. So this is sort of what we have in mind. And there's a draft now that's already been provided to administrative staff as well as Watermaster Council. There are a lot of holes, but we're already working towards what that document looks like and filling in the missing pieces. And that's really it, unless you have questions.
Any questions? All right, administrators report.
All right, just a couple of items to update. Forward on, Phyllis mentioned in her report regarding the annual report that we need to get the financial audit complete. We were hoping to have that for consideration to accept and file at this board meeting, but unfortunately it's not quite ready yet. We're putting pressure on the auditor to get that wrapped up. We will definitely bring that before the board in July to accept and file, and that should be sufficient time to include it in the final annual report. Second item, item 9B, we've discussed this briefly before, but we're starting to put together some thought into a contact list that we can post on the website of willing sellers and buyers of available production rights for transfers. We think it will help both sides, sellers and buyers. So at the next board meeting, we're going to present what information we would like to include on the website and the process for those willing to transfer or purchase production right, what that process looks like, and develop a quick policy form. So we'll have that at the next board meeting as well. And then I'm going to let Pete talk about item number 9C.
Oh, that's all right. 9C, we're going to be giving the lead to Antelope Valley State Water Contractors Association in developing that first draft of the contract between Watermaster and the state water contractors on delivering and purchasing the replacement water. So we're hoping to tee that up at our next state water contractors meeting in July.
That's all we have to report, unless you have any questions.
Yeah, I thought we also, at that hoc committee meeting, which Director Atkinson, myself, and you two there, and Patty, we also talked about the possibility of including the Watermaster in the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan to position the Watermaster for potential grant funding.
Yep, that's a good point. So, as Director Reed mentioned, there is an Antelope Valley Integrated Regional Water Management Group already formed. There's currently 11 member agencies, most of the public agencies locally. So during our ad hoc committee meeting, we discussed the possibility for the Watermaster to go after and pursue grant funding that could help with things like planning documents, groundwater models. So the idea was floated around that the AV Watermaster could become one of the member agencies of the Irwin Group. And that way we could submit our project.
But in the previous discussion we just had, there was an indication that we are a public agency, and as such, it'd be interesting to see if not being a public agency, we could be part of that group or not. I mean, I guess we don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly an interested party.
Right. I know that the groundwater basin in the greater LA area, they are participating in the integrated water management plan. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're an entity that will advocate water issues. And that's what the integrated water management plan. Now, if there are strict legal requirements by the state to be a member of the integrated water management plan, you have to have some sort of, I don't know what it is, you have to be certain kind of agency, and we don't fit that definition.
But I think that maybe Waterworks and AVEK and Palmdale Water District could all possibly sponsor a project that would be consistent with what the Water Master Board is looking to do. Possibly that's an avenue to.
And they are. I was mostly interested in, as Matt said, there are specific project that we could be taking going into the future. As an example, he mentioned the model. Maybe even static water level monitoring if we expand the network well. And there is a possibility that, or maybe, well, for that matter, groundwater recharge activities. So if there's some funding from propositions or other, like state revolving fund loan or grants, actually, state revolving fund grant, you know, if we can be part of this process, I think it would be really, really worth it. So maybe
Yeah, we can look into those.
we can look
questions.
into the Watermaster being part of it and then take it from there.
We definitely, I mean, even if we don't qualify to be one of the regional water management group members, one of the 11, we could always be a stakeholder and submit our proposed project as a stakeholder.
Correct.
Any other comments on that? Phyllis, Watermaster Engineers Report.
Thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity to do a little bit of whining again, like I do every year, about non-compliance of production reporting. And I know you have asked questions, this board has asked questions of us in the past about, you know, sort of the outstanding numbers of persons and the amount of water that might be associated with them. And so I just listed that there are 34 Exhibit 4 parties that are not, that have not reported production. And many of those, as you know, have 0 acre-feet of production right. We added up the remaining parties that were not reporting, and from 2016, 17, and 18 reporting, the amounts that are not reported are relatively small. Perhaps they total, and this is a rough estimate because I don't know exactly how many acre-feet we're pumping, but that missing amount might be somewhere between 1,500 acre-feet to about 3,000 acre-feet. So 90,000 acre-feet being produced in the basin, that's a relatively small percentage. Nonetheless, I take very seriously the engineer's responsibility to monitor the safe yield components, including the fact everyone is being asked, every party is being asked to report their production. This is a big deal, and it's not a huge lift. This is not a crazy ask. This is just, we just would like for the parties to comply with the judgment. So I know that staff continually works with the parties to make sure that all this production is reported. We're providing our list to administrative staff of, you know, sort of the larger, maybe some of the larger landowners that have not reported. And our goal is to get to 100% reporting, because there's just no reason that we can't. It's not as if this judgment has 5,000 parties in it. We know there's a large number of small pumpers, but they're not reporting. And so the numbers of parties that we have to fill out a little, you know, one-pager here to just tell us how much they're producing is not a big deal and should be done by all parties. So again, just using this opportunity to whine a little bit about that. It doesn't represent a lot of water, but there's no reason that we can't know exactly how much the parties are producing out of this basin. Thank you.
I was smiling every time somebody mentioned modeling.
I had you convinced.
Greg, go ahead.
This is the General Counsel's report on number 11. A few items to update you on. For a number of months, I've been telling you that Joshua Memorial Park would be coming forward with a request to intervene in the judgment. They did the middle part, I believe, of last month, or early this month, with a substantial application and request that we stipulate to their intervention as a non-party seeking to become a non-stipulating party to the judgment, and with the production right. So that has implications. If they come in and obtain a production right, they're not subject to replacement water assessment. There's an engineer's analysis that needs to be done about the amount of water they claim that they've pumped. But a number of other questions have been raised by the advisory committee, 5 in particular if you look at the advisory committee report. And my plan is to have counsel for SCI respond in writing to all the problems that have been raised about their application. Hopefully, we have something to report in progress on that by next month. But we've waited a long time for their application. I don't feel necessarily a rush to get it done in July. But I want to let you know there's concerns about their status as a party, whether they're within the service area of a public water supplier, a number of questions you can see from the advisory committee that I didn't have answers to. And my structure for this is for counsel for SCI to be made aware of that. He's seen the advisory committee comments and to prepare a written explanation that addresses all the objections and to have a full discussion of those at the next board meeting. So this is an item of update for you only. Second, Wagas Land Company, we already talked about that. You heard their request to waive their duty to meter. That was rejected. I've communicated to them in writing that their duty to meter starts and we expect compliance in a definite time frame, and we'll follow that and monitor that as to what their response is. We may have to do an enforcement act. An update on the Derrick settlement. That was a very prominent matter here, and important matter that you directed me to engage in communications with Becky Derrick to see if we could resolve it. The problem, to remind you, was that the Derrick interest reported 735 acre-feet of groundwater production in 2018, and that yielded a replacement water assessment that was substantial, over $300,000. They went back and looked at their records, and Becky Derrick came back with the position that they actually used more like just less than 300 acre-feet of water on their property. We worked with the Watermaster engineer, and Phyllis's staff did a fantastic job looking at aerial photos historically of 2018 of the property. Came to also look at what crop coefficients would be for alfalfa usage in 2018 in light of rainfall, and did a ballpark estimate that it was more likely than not that they used approximately 400 acre-feet of water on their property. And I have put that position forward to Ms. Derrick's counsel. I believe they're very receptive to it. They plan on, my understanding is they have not signed any agreement to this effect. I thought we might get an update today. But Becky Derrick has come in and paid her entire administrative assessments for 3 years based on the numbers that I've negotiated with her counsel. We don't have a written agreement yet. I hope to present it to you next month in the board packet with the resolution that it's a done deal. My understanding is she plans to pay the replacement water assessment by getting transferred water from a party to the judgment. That will be carefully monitored. She'll have to provide that documentation to the Watermaster staff and the engineer, and they'll take whatever necessary steps are to make an accounting of that and use it for usage in the basin in general. So it's a positive development. I'm waiting to see finally that can get finalized, but everything that I'm understanding from Ms. Derrick is that they're going to go forward with signing the agreement. So a positive response, and that'll be on the agenda hopefully for final settlement approval next year, or next month. The agreement says we have a disagreement about the replacement water assessment, and that if we don't get full compliance with the settlement, the transfer is to occur 15 days after executing the agreement. If it doesn't happen, we reserve our right to go back to court, enforce the order completely, get costs, fees, interest, which we are giving up in this situation. That has been a persistent matter. First Mutual is in the process. They have indicated of being taken over by Rosamond. I've talked to Rosamond's representative here about the timing of that. The whole question is, does First Mutual need to meter now, or can they wait until the time that they're taken over by Rosamond? That is such an uncertain time that I intend to go forward with enforcement as soon as possible, even though they've Mr. Cox has been very forthcoming with production reports and really doesn't want a meter because he thinks that that's going to be subsumed when they're taken over by Roseman, but I don't have any sense that that's in the near future that's going to happen. So we'll go forward with insisting that he get metering done. West Valley County Water District and Federal Reserve right. West Valley made me aware earlier this month in a letter that the Watermaster had not, in their view, properly accounted for their Federal Reserve right that was based on an agreement they had prior to the judgment being entered into with a number of the public water suppliers. I've written them a letter requesting more information. I assume they have told me that that information may be in the domain of county counsel and their lawyers in the litigation. My concern is that it appears to be an effort to amend the judgment without going through the court process and making Judge Comar aware of that. But I asked for documentation from the record from Judge Comar that he considered this agreement in the judgment that he entered, and so that we can move forward on it. Now there's too many open questions, concerns about what the nature of the agreement was and whether it's an end around the judgment or not. I want to be assured when I recommend to you whatever we recommend concerning West Valley that we have a full record and I have a full understanding of how that pre-judgment agreement, it was done in March and amended also in September of 2015, how that was made known to Judge Comar when he entered judgment in December of 2015. So some questions remain. I think we'll hopefully get some answers and I'll report back to you next month.
Are they even mentioned in the judgment?
Yes, they're mentioned in the judgment, and there's a Federal Reserve right that goes to a number of parties, but then the language says except for West Valley County Water District and Boron. So by the language itself, it appears that they're specifically accepted from the Federal Reserve right. They go back and provided this agreement and said, you don't understand, we have an agreement with public water suppliers. It's a contract. And my response has been, show me where the court understood that this was to be subsumed in the judgment, and then we can consider it. So that's how the discussion's gone.
Do they have any native field rights? Native field?
Yes. They have a production right, I believe, of 40 acre-feet a year. And my understanding from Phyllis, and Phyllis, you can confirm this, is that no Federal Reserve water has been allocated to West Valley since the judgment's been entered.
Right.
So that's my update report.
Any other questions, comments? Requests for future agenda items?
No, I don't have any requests for future agenda items, but I only rarely get to sit up here, and which is by design, by the way. And but I just had a comment on how far the Watermaster Board has come in the last 2 or 3 years from when it started to where we are today. I know that Phyllis is whining a little bit about 1,500 to 3,000 acre-feet, and I can appreciate her dedication to that professionalism, but I kind of look at it the other way. We're getting 97% or 95% compliance on the production reports, which I think in the first 3 years of the organization is pretty good rate for our group here. So just wanted to make that note that I think that the board's done a really great job, the staff and all the consultants and all the participants out there have done a great job in making this a viable entity that's beginning to really hum along fairly well.
Thanks, Tony. Next meeting, July 24th, and we're adjourned.
Thank you.